Republican senator from Oklahoma, on tape. But right here, live, we have Republican senator from Wisconsin, Senator Ron Johnson. I got deeply upset during the commercial break because Mark Halperin asked you a really good question.
All the good stuff.
Off air, dressing room fighter. Ask it again.
What's your position on daylight savings time?
Right. I'm for it across the board. I like having more daylight.
Now we're talking a lot about bipartisanship and the chance for compromise, and you said there needs to be leadership. One of the big issues now is, can there be coalitions in the Senate? So the question I asked you was, which Democratic senators do you feel you can work with to try to forge deals, not just on budget issues, but on everything?
Sure. Well, let's face it. I think people like Mark Warner, Joe Manchin, Claire McCaskill, I'm going to be her ranking member on an oversight committee. Tom Carper, I think, is very serious about making sure the government is effective and efficient. So, I mean, there are people, but we have to begin the process. And that's really what the president did last week. He began that process, but it's just a first step. I would say the next step is we have got to agree on the facts and figures. You know, I get on these shows and you argue back and forth. I don't want to argue on the facts and figures. You have to first spend a fair amount of time. That's what I learned in business negotiations. Rather than argue about what you disagree on, first figure out what you agree on, and in that process, you develop the relationship, you develop the trust. To once you get to those disagreements, they're a lot easier to come to resolution. So that'd be the first thing.
Your fellow home state member of Congress, Paul Ryan, still seems to say we got to get rid of Obamacare. Do you accept that Obamacare is the law of the land, going to be phased in, and whatever deals are struck are going to have to be done with the assumption that Obamacare is here to stay?
Well, it's obviously the law of the land right now. Obviously, I'm concerned about it. I think the cost estimate of Obamacare is grossly understated. I think far more Americans are going to lose their employer-sponsored care because there are incentives for employers to drop the coverage and make their employees eligible for huge subsidies in the exchanges. I think this is going to explode our deficit. It's going to lead to rationing. It will lead to rationing, lower quality of care. Here's the basic economic problem with Obamacare.
Why will it lead to rationing?
Because it dramatically increases the demand for health care. 30 million Americans getting health care kind of through a Medicaid type of process, while it dramatically reduces the supply. That's an economic disaster. I mean, when you're taking $716 billion out of payments primarily to providers, you're reducing supply, increasing demand. That doesn't lower the cost curve, that increases the cost curve.
Well, so again, just to stay on health care, lots of big issues, and I know you want to talk about some of the facts, but do you aspire to live in a country where we have universal health care? Is that a goal of yours?
What I aspire is to health care being governed more by a free market competitive system. I always use the example of one area of healthcare that generally isn't covered by a third-party payer or by governments. It's eyeglasses. The free market has actually produced businesses that you can walk off the street, get eyeglasses in an hour, 2 for the price of 1, and take a look at the quality of laser surgery. It's gone up, and the price has gone down the last 10 years. But the free market system is a marvel in terms of guaranteeing the lowest possible price and cost, the highest possible level of quality and customer service. But we're moving in the opposite direction with government control.
Yes or no, do you aspire for the United States to have universal health care coverage for everyone?
I want everybody to be able to access health care, affordable health care, but you do that through the free market, not through government control. We've moved in the wrong direction that way.
What do you do about people looking for eyeglasses who just can't afford eyeglasses?
Yeah, well, listen, we are a compassionate society. We want a strong social safety net. But Mike, the problem is, how do you design that strong social safety net without incentivizing people to take advantage of it that really shouldn't be taking advantage of it? I mean, when you've gone from about 17 million people on food stamps in the year 2000 to 47 million in 12 years later, I think you have a problem, particularly when you're running deficits. Over the last 4 years, $5.1 trillion. Do you know what we're doing to our children? Here's a point I was trying to make, is I do not know a parent that would willingly drive up their debt, max out their credit cards, never intending to pay it off, just dump that off on their kids and grandkids. And yet, collectively, that is exactly what we're doing to our children. I mean, it's utterly immoral. We have to come to terms with that. We've got to start reforming these promises, these programs we've made to people, try and honor them, but recognize that we don't have the capability of paying for them without bankrupting and mortgaging our children's future.
One of the things I always wonder about when we talk about the deficit, why don't we hear more about how to grow, solutions for growth? Because if you think about history, it's not so much the size of the debt, it's how fast you're growing. In the Clinton era, we grew out of debt. We grew faster. There were policies in place that I think helped foster that. What can we do now to get out of the 2% economy?
Well, first of all, you don't increase taxes on small to medium-sized business people. Everything we should do in Washington, I agree totally, should be targeted pointed toward economic growth. And here, just a couple numbers. Even with the meager economic growth we've had from 2009 to 2012, revenue to the federal government has increased by $344 billion per year. If we just return to a normal economy like we had in 2007, when the government collected about 18.5% of GDP in revenue, just a little bit more than the 50-year average, that would add another $435 billion per year. Mike, you were talking about repatriating those corporate earnings. $42 billion. The fiscal cliff deal will raise about $41 billion. That's a tenth of what we can get through economic growth. So, I totally agree. Republicans try and talk about economic growth, but you get mired down into the detailed policy and unfortunately the punishing success. It doesn't work.
Well, Senator, on that point, Donnie Deutsch and I got into it this morning about the messaging of the GOP, and he was making the argument that we're largely top down. We care more about the rich guy than we do the little guy. And my argument was that we have fundamentally been in a position, I think, over a long time, talking about the power of small business owners and keeping that community-oriented growth from the bottom up. How do you respond to the noise and the clamor about Republicans being out of touch and focus more on tax cuts for the rich, billionaires and millionaires, as opposed to what you just expressed here in terms of focus?
I'm never talking about any tax cuts for the rich. We're not in a position where we can cut taxes. We're just trying not to penalize their success. But I am one of those small to medium-sized business people. I know the incentives of what makes me do things, what prevents me from doing things. But listen, I am concerned about every American. I think all of us share the same goal. We want a prosperous America. We want every American to be able to build a good life for themselves and their families. But you do that by making sure we have a robust economy so that people have the dignity of being able to get a job. And you don't have that when you just continue to grow government. You can get government jobs, but those aren't self-sustaining.
But off of former Chairman Steele's comments just now about messaging, you mentioned food stamps a few moments ago. If you've lost your job in the last 10 years, if you haven't received a raise in the last 8 years, and you've got 3 or 4 kids, and you're a middle-income family, food stamps, you're going to go to food stamps. I mean, that accounts for a huge percentage of the growth in food stamps, I would think. Why is it that a lot of Republicans choose to drop, like scratching a sore, food stamps instead of corporate profits overseas and dropping the hammer on those bastards?
Well, look, first of all, I am all for dramatic tax reform. When I had dinner with the president, my suggestion was rather than tinker around the edges, let's scrap the entire tax code. Let's start from a clean piece of paper, and let's build a tax code that raises the revenue we need and does no economic harm. But in terms of food stamps, generally the number of Americans, the percentage of Americans that are on food stamps range somewhere between 6 and 10%. We're up to about 15%. Something has gone off kilter here, and again, I'm not saying let's not help those that need help. We want to help those folks, but what can we afford? We have to take an honest assessment of, Social Security. Here's a little chart. It drives me crazy when people say Social Security is solvent through the year 2035 or 2038. It's not. In the next 20 years, Social Security will pay out $5.1 trillion more in benefits than it takes in the payroll tax. This isn't a sustainable system. Medicare is worse. The liabilities in the federal government, just Medicare, Social Security, our debt, and what we owe federal retirees is larger than the private net asset base in the United States. All assets held by small businesses, large businesses, and households. This is a problem. And so the other point I made to the president was, if we're going to solve these problems, we have to build relationships. We have to build trust. But we have to agree on the numbers. And we have to spend a lot of time going, here are the facts. Facts don't lie. Let's spend a lot of time fleshing that out. Let's agree to that. And then, by the way, the president has a perfect platform to let the American people know the extent of the problem. One of the points he made is Americans pay $1 into Medicare, they get more than $3 out. That's a message only the president can really break through and let the American people know about.
You had a good meal and you didn't have to pay for it.
Right. Senator Ron Johnson with a hopeful message for the president of the United States. Thanks, Senator.
Thank you.